Senior producer Lou DeVizio spoke with a former family court judge and mental health advocate to understand how we can better address some of the contributing factors in these incidents.
We're joined today by two New Mexico residents who've spent decades working in the domestic violence field trying to prevent domestic violence. Larry Jones, retired Superior Court judge who spent years working in family courts in New Jersey. He's also worked at Monmouth University as a professor and developed research on public policy dealing with domestic violence. And Joni Jones, we're lucky to have you too, a registered nurse who's served on the New Jersey Board of Nursing, worked for years in the mental health field, and was also recently invited to join Senator Lujan's Mental Health Consortium. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us here today. Appreciate it.
Of course. So starting with you, Larry, many of us have an idea of what we think domestic violence is, but you can get caught in that mindset of, it's not going to happen to me, so I don't need to think about it so much. But that's obviously not always the case. In your work in family court, what have you found are some of the common misconceptions about domestic violence?
Well, probably the greatest misconception is that it has to be physical. A lot of times people hear the term domestic violence and they assume it means a husband hitting a wife or a dating partner assaulting, the other partner. But domestic violence can get a lot more involved than that. It can involve non-physical forms of abuse, harassment, cyber harassment, stalking. Sometimes people are in an abusive relationship and they don't even recognize that they were in an abusive relationship for some period of time. So that's one misconception. And another huge misconception that many in the public have is the question they ask sometimes: why doesn't the person who is being abused just leave? As if it's a free voluntary choice to just pick up and go. And there are so many complicating factors in a domestic situation which can make it very difficult for someone to leave even if they're being abused. There may be children involved. There may be financial dependency. There may be all types of emotional and psychological issues going on in the relationship, perhaps a codependent relationship. There may be generalized fear. There may be public shame. For some people may feel that way even though they've done nothing wrong. So it can get very complicated, and the study of domestic violence has really taken on, much more steam, much more strength in the last, I'd say, 10 to 20 years.
Now, Joni, through your work, you found PTSD and other mental health factors can have a major impact on domestic violence, the cycle of domestic violence. How does our understanding of mental health as a society, including access to mental health service, play into this equation?
Yeah, well, the post-traumatic stress becomes a very important issue because in my experience working with people, it stifles people. So it really generates an underlying fear. And they think that when they have mental health challenges that they're going to go on maybe some medication to address, the PTSD or the anxiety or the depression. But one of the biggest misconceptions is medications do not skill build. So what they do is they may assist in their attention, their ability to focus, and learn, because sitting, attending, and focusing are the prerequisites of learning. So many people think, oh, gee, let me take the medication, and then that's going to make everything go away. They don't understand that it doesn't have that skill building component. But we're all born with a survival mechanism, and this is our adrenal glands, and this is where people might know the fight or flight or freeze response. And when we're doing the skill building, what happens is we teach people to be mindful because many people want the trauma to go away, and trauma doesn't go away. We can't erase events in our lives, and they have to learn how to manage it. And triggers can happen at any time. You don't know when those triggers are going to happen. So when they understand that response and they're getting that, there's an alert that there's some type of threat or the danger, they can learn to push that pause button. When they learn to push that pause button, it becomes very important, because when you go to high levels of those hormone surges, you're actually put into the part of the brain where you become very impulsive, very reactionary, and you go on to the what ifs, what you believe is happening. And since there's no logical thinking, there is no decision-making capabilities. So we really have to teach people to manage it so that they can get to the part of the brain that is non-reactionary, that it looks logically at things, and they're able to make informed decisions.
Earlier this year, President Biden signed into law the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Can you describe for our viewers how that action will help increase awareness and enforcement?
The bill it was in logjam basically in Congress for about 4 or 5 years, from 2017 until now, for various reasons. But it finally got passed and reauthorized in March and just became effective this past week, October 1st, starting the month of the National Domestic Violence Awareness Month and Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. So there's been a lot of press about the bill and a lot of interest in the bill. The question which comes up sometimes is, well, how does that impact on everyday lives? So the first thing to know is that's a federal bill. It's a federal bill. So while it states a lot in there, each state has its own set of domestic violence laws. For example, New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, has a domestic violence statute, a series of them, Prevention of Family Violence Act. Each state has their own set. And from state to state, these bills differ. Some of them look alike, and some are very different from each other in terms of their definitions. What the federal bill does, it does several things that are helpful. First of all, it's a funding bill. So it provides a lot of funding for state agencies and nonprofit organizations to basically provide services and resources to survivors of domestic violence, as well as training for law enforcement, for educators, things like that. So it's very important in terms of funding a lot of these state programs. So that's number one. Number two, it provides a great roadmap, in my opinion, of public policy straight from Washington about the importance of preventing or fighting domestic violence. Because if you read through the act, and it's a lengthy act, but if you read through even the summaries, you'll see that they focus on inclusive type language to try to protect and recognize that there's been domestic violence in a lot of underserved communities, the disabled, the elderly, like Joni was talking about, in rural areas, young children, the LGBTQ community, the Native American community, and which is important, obviously, in New Mexico and other parts of the country. And also, from a legal standpoint, the bill is very important in New Mexico because it provides tribal jurisdiction on certain criminal acts that previously did not exist or existed on almost a limited basis. It was expanded so that if domestic violence abuse occurs on tribal lands, that there can be consequences against the defendant greater than there were previously through tribal enforcement. So there's a lot in the bill, and for those who work in the domestic violence field, for the most part, it was a very positive step. There's some room for growth even within the bill, but for now, at least, it was a positive step overall.
Sure. Now, Joni, at the top of this discussion, I mentioned this that you are invited to join Senator Lujan's Mental Health Consortium. Can you describe some of the work that group will be doing and how it will try to address some of the underlying issues that contribute to domestic violence?
What he did was he opened up to New Mexicans, people who are in the field, people who just have a passion in mental health, that may be affected by mental health, that are advocates, to join this consortium where everybody would collectively come together and discuss the federal policy and how it impacts all individuals in New Mexico, and how they can come up with some of the solutions, some of the challenges, some of the lack of access to care that we have here, and then work with other officials and advocates to come up, with ways that we can address this so all needs are met for all people in New Mexico.
We mentioned misconceptions at the top, but anything that people should know about domestic violence, about their understanding, about our society's understanding?
First of all, if anyone feels that they are the subject of domestic violence, they should seek help. And there are lots of different ways to seek help. You can consult, there are many good organizations in New Mexico and throughout the country, nonprofit organizations, governmental organizations, that their whole function, or a large part of why they are there, is to help people who are in a situation where it's abusive, where it's violent. Domestic violence doesn't just go away on its own. And you see often there are reconciliations that don't last more than 3 days, and then there's another act of domestic violence. It's very well researched that there's a cycle of domestic violence, they call it. So very often, even when somebody commits domestic violence and then apologizes and is all remorseful, it can happen again very quickly unless there's some interventions, and even the interventions don't always work, batterer's intervention and things like that. So it's very important for people who have who are in that type of situation to at least discuss it with somebody in confidence before it grows larger. Whether it's one of the nonprofit organizations, whether it's the police, whether it's an advocacy organization, to stay silent about it, even though you can understand why some people historically have chosen to, very often it gets worse. And there's lots of people who have waited perhaps too long to take action, and the consequences have been drastic in certain instances. So it's very important to be alert to that, and also to be supportive of other friends and family members who may find themselves in that type of situation as well.
As Larry alluded to, many people don't talk about the abuse that's going on, and there's various reasons for that. You know, we should look at any type of change that we see occurring in an individual, and to be very comfortable to even talk about it. Because one of the things that I do want the public to know, and this is a very big misconception, because when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about depression and people feel that there's no way out, they start to contemplate suicide. And people think that if they ask somebody if they are suicidal, that they're going to put that thought into their head, and that is not the case. It's not the case at all. There's a lot of research on it. It's just, again, another conversational starter. And I think that's what the public needs to be aware of, you know, the vigilance, the awareness, and to take action on that.